With another important feature from my morning radio show on KFNX in Phoenix, I'm Charles Goyette for AntiwarRadio.com.
Right now on our show is Jeremy Scahill, and I'm pleased to have him on the program, particularly because he's the guy that wrote the book. He's the guy that really told the story, brought Blackwater to the world's attention. Jeremy Scahill joins us by telephone this morning on the show. He is the author of the international bestseller, the international expose, Blackwater, The Rise of the World's Most Powerful Mercenary Army. I mean, so help me, people knew nothing about Blackwater when he wrote the book, and I suppose they know very little about it now, but at least they're curious. Jeremy Scahill, good morning, sir.
Good morning, Charles. Sorry about the confusion there.
That's okay. It goes with our territory here.
Time zone monopoly or something.
We have that all the time. It's usually our fault on our side. But we're glad to have you on the program, and I'm particularly pleased to have you on to tell a little bit of the story about the mercenary army and the profiteering and stuff. I don't know. I suppose the place to begin, Jeremy, you're experienced at telling the tale, but I suppose the place to begin is at the beginning where these guys came from.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think it's important for people to know, and I'm surprised at how few people actually realize this right now in the United States, that in Iraq there are 150,000 U.S. troops on the ground, sometimes 160, sometimes it's less, but let's say about 150,000 U.S. troops. They're actually the junior partner in the coalition that's occupying Iraq, and it's not a junior partner to NATO or the UN or to another nation state. It's actually a junior partner to a corporate army of what are called private contractors. Like, I don't know about you, but when I thought of what the word contractor meant, growing up, I thought it was construction guys or people who were building something, but we call these sort of private soldiers contractors. It's a way of sort of masking what they do. And so 108,000 private contractors in Iraq. Now, not all of them are armed. Some of them drive trucks. Some of them cook food. All of them do jobs that have traditionally been done by the U.S. military. And tens of thousands of them are armed operatives like those that work for Blackwater. And this is a company that basically didn't exist about a decade ago. And it has risen out of the Great Dismal Swamp in North Carolina. You can't make it up. That's where they're based, the Great Dismal Swamp of North Carolina, on a 7,000-acre private military base. And they rose up in the last decade to become one of the most powerful private actors in the war on terror. I mean, this is like the elite guard for the Bush administration's occupation of Iraq. They work for the White House, private soldiers, protecting the most hated occupation officials in Iraq. And Blackwater is not just in Iraq, it's all around the world. And what they've done, this company, which is owned by one man named Eric Prince, who has been a major contributor to the Republican Party. His family was at the center of the funding of the religious right, radical religious right in this country. He's building up a parallel infrastructure to the U.S. national security infrastructure. They have their own private intelligence agency. They're making their own armored vehicles, surveillance blimps. They do a very robust business in training inside of the United States. They work for other governments and corporations around the world.
Wow. Well, I think that it seems to me that you're right. In part, the idea is to mask, to conceal the actual size of the American troop commitment to Iraq. I mean, this virtually doubles our troop commitment. Instead of talking about 150,
it more than doubles it, and it also there's a reason that we don't have a draft in this country because Bush and Cheney and those guys know if they started subjecting people to a draft. A lot of folks would stop watching, Britney Spears 24/7 and would start doing something about the war. But the fact is that when you don't want to have a draft for political reasons and you don't want to work with other nation states and you don't want to engage in diplomacy, then what you do is you just an army with personnel from 100 countries around the world. The stats are staggering, Charles. You've got 180,000 contractors. Some of whom from Chile, Colombia, Peru, Nepal, on and on, 100 countries. They work for 630 corporations. The U.S. spends about $2.3 billion a week on the war in Iraq, and about 40 cents of every dollar of that goes directly to war corporations. So it's also a way of looting the U.S. Treasury. Iraq wasn't just about oil or about geopolitics in that region. Iraq was also about radically changing the U.S. government. I mean, we're in the midst of the most radical privatization agenda in our nation's history, and we see it in every aspect of our lives, and now it's just full-blown Frankenstein in Iraq.
What does if you include the contractors, what does this do to the death toll of Americans and American contractors, people contracted to Americans, not necessarily American citizens?
No, this is a very important part of this discussion. I mean, we don't know how many contractors exactly have been killed in Iraq because there's no official count of their deaths or their injuries. But what I've been able to discover through the U.S. Department of Labor, and I'll explain why that is through the U.S. Department of Labor, is that about 1,200 contractors, their families have applied for federal death benefits for them, meaning that at a minimum 1,200 contractors have died in Iraq. Over 13,000 have been wounded. But that number only reflects those people who are eligible for some kind of benefits in the United States. So if you have personnel drawn from 100 countries around the world, you think some family from Nepal is going to travel to Washington to apply for death benefits for the breadwinner of the family who was killed in a roadside bomb in Iraq. So it really masks the human toll of the occupation in both American lives and in the lives of third country nationals who work for the U.S. occupation.
All right. I think it's important to talk about these contractors and the way that they are viewed in Iraq. Americans were really not privy to the whole story when Americans saw those 4 bodies hanging from the bridge. And they had no idea, and the news media didn't do a very good job telling the people how the Iraqis had been complaining about the lawlessness of these contractors running around their country. And I wonder if you could tell us that part of the story.
I mean, I'm sure that this is sort of how you heard of Blackwater as well, Charles. I mean, it was definitely, they were not on my radar before March 31st, 2004, when 4 of their men were ambushed and killed in the Iraqi city of Fallujah, dragged through the streets. I've gotten to know the families of those 4 men very well, and they're actually suing Blackwater, alleging that Blackwater is responsible for their deaths because they were sent into a city. Some of them hadn't even been in Iraq for 72 hours, without armored vehicles, short 2 men on their mission, and without a heavy saw machine gun on the back of the vehicle with a 360 swivel on it. And so they go into the most dangerous city in the world. They're ambushed and killed. And then Bush, we learn from Lieutenant General Ricardo Sanchez's book, goes ballistic, has Cheney on the phone and the commanders in Iraq, and he's saying, kill them. This isn't going to be like Vietnam. Crush them. We're going to wipe them out. And so they wipe out the Iraqi city of Fallujah in revenge for the deaths of not 4 U.S. soldiers, not U.S. civilians, as the media reported, but 4 private soldiers working for a for-profit war corporation. And so the perception on the part of the Iraqis at the time was that they were being collectively punished for the deaths of these 4 contractors, while for a year leading up to that, Iraqis had dealt with out-of-control contractors shooting up vehicles, killing civilians, being involved with every aspect of the worst violence in Iraq. And I think to the Iraqis, it's very telling that they actually call Blackwater and these other mercenary companies in Iraq Mossad, which is the Israeli intelligence agency. They don't actually believe Mossad. They're saying it because the Mossad is considered in many parts of the Arab and Muslim world the sort of worst insult that you could hurl at someone, and that's how these guys are referred to.
Yeah. I gather that the Iraqis complained over and over again to the American forces, the coalition provisional government or whatever it was, about the cowboy-like behavior of these unanswerable contractors, and it fell on deaf ears.
Well, what happened, and we just came out with an updated and revised version of my book in paperback form, and one of the things that I have about 100-plus pages of new material in it, looking at the Nice Square shooting last September and the months leading up to that. And you have a government in Iraq which almost can't even be called a government. I mean, it's sort of a puppet regime. But these guys consistently for a year before that shooting last September where 17 Iraqis were killed, Iraqi officials were complaining about not just the conduct or misconduct of contractors in general, but specifically of Blackwater. And the Iraqis claim that there were 6 deadly incidents involving Blackwater before Nice Square. Also a case where an off-duty Blackwater contractor was drunk and stumbling through the green zone and ends up shooting and killing a bodyguard to the Iraqi vice president. And Blackwater whisked that individual out of the country in collusion with the State Department, and no charges have been brought against him. And so the Iraqis complained to the U.S. Embassy and said, Iraqis wouldn't understand this if they saw a man who had murdered, and they use the word murder, a bodyguard to the Iraqi vice president, and nothing happens to him. In fact, he goes home and walks around a free man. So there was a pattern of even the sort of puppet government in Iraq raising these questions, and it went absolutely nowhere. And the part of this story that Blackwater doesn't want to talk about, and that people in the sort of right-wing punditry circuit don't want to talk about, is that it's not just people like me who are complaining about Blackwater or the Iraqi government. The U.S. military is outraged at what they're doing in Iraq, and to me that's the most telling sign that this is a very serious problem.